Thank you, Steve, for your very concise intervention. Let me now proceed with the second speaker, Carlos Nobre, who is also a member of the UN Secretary General Scientific Advisory Board. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning to all. I'm a new kid on the block of science advice. I've been into that for only a little bit more than 3 years. So I will just give my personal perspective from my earlier career as a scientist, why I moved to science advice, and why I think it's so important for scientists to understand this process as well. A personal, let me tell you how I learned how tough is to cross the bridge between science and policy. And this goes back 20 years ago, and my colleague here, panelist Pavel Kabat, did that along with me and many other scientists when, on the wake of Rio 92 and the Agenda 21, sustainable development, we proposed a large number of international scientists proposed a scientific experiment in the Amazon to learn how the system functions, how to protect the biodiversity, the forests, and how to provide the basis, scientific basis for sustainable development. This is all well-meaning, but it was in fact very naive of us scientists. So we planned for 5 years this experiment, but only among scientists, mostly. And then we set out, went to the field. It was a beautiful scientific enterprise, over 1,000 scientists, students, over $250 million spent, 12 years, long-term, 150 plus studies. So scientifically, these accomplished a lot. More than 2,000 peer-reviewed papers, over 400 PhDs and masters, mostly in the Amazon, which is a long-term legacy, and all the metrics of success in science. But don't forget, we had in mind that we wanted that to deliver information for sustainability, and in a particular hot spot in the planet, the Amazon. Then, in 2004, 10 years ago, we produced the first science policy meeting in Brasilia, and we invited all the top science policy making people involved at the ministries, development ministry, agricultural, environment, you name it. All of them confirmed, and none of them showed up. They sent only the junior ranks. And in fact, that meeting was very bad, because we are, all of us, talking to ourselves, trying to convey the message. Anyway, so that was a hard learning. And one lesson from that was engage the relevant policy-making community at day one of planning and execution of any of this science that you tackling global problems. Okay, now moving completely from there, it's a local, it's a regional experience from my IPCC experience. Of course, IPCC is, I would say, the jewel of the crown of international science advice. I don't think there is anything similar or as robust. The process is transparent, international, interdisciplinary, high scientific quality, and pretty much, I would say, independent of extraneous pressures. By design, engages governments. SPM is constructed submarine for policymakers jointly. The process has been evolving. For a scientist, this is really all we can do. I mean, this is very good. Still, greenhouse gas concentrations continue to rise, and I would doubt anybody can say when they will stop rising. So let's say science, even when you do apparently right, engaging governments, engaging policymakers at government international level, is only a necessary condition, very far from being sufficient. And for a scientist to realize that, this is a big drawback, that science is not all. Science does not have the power, the clout, sometimes to make things change, although we would like to believe we do as scientists. And third, and following up on that, my perception, and being part of this UN scientific advisory panel, my perceptions are even broader today, that is science perceived to play a crucial role for sustainable development? I mean, other people have mentioned that already. If you look at the final document of the Rio Plus 20 conference, The Future We Want, it mentions science policy interface 6 times. Science is not mentioned at all. It was not for lack of attempts. I was in the science advisory role in my country, and even before the final day, 2 days before the final document was approved, there were, I don't know, 20, 25 references about the fundamental role of science. All were deleted. So there was quite a shock for me, because I think, again, very naively, it was so obvious for me, the crucial role of science for sustainable development, but it was not simply there. The same is true for the ongoing sustainable development goals. It only appears marginally on proposal goal 17, strengthen the means of implementation and the global partnership for sustainable development, promote North-South and South-South collaboration on and access to science, technology, and innovation. Access to science, not science as a fundamental value, and very marginally. This realization of this lack of importance attributed to science in this really guiding document, I mean, the Rio Plus 20 final document and this important outcome, the Sustainable Development Goals, made really this to be the first priority, initial priority of the scientific advisory body. I'm happy to see here Professor Jörg Hacker, who led a small group which really proposed a new interpretation, putting a lot of material to put emphasis to science. Many recommendations were made, and Professor Hacker is working hard, has been to New York trying to influence the process, and I really hope he and succeed, but I'm not overly optimistic. I think there is a more fundamental perception problem. Science may not be widely perceived as fundamental, playing a fundamental role for sustainable development. And I think we have to work more in the, let's say, understanding why not, and understanding what underpins this perception, global perception. And although I would agree with the comment made yesterday in here, this is true in Brazil as well, and for most countries in the world, perhaps a few exceptions, that science is very high in people's perception of importance. Scientific community is much more credible than, let's say, politicians or political parties, but that does not translate into understanding that science is not a means of implementation of sustainable development, but also a very fundamental way of transforming the planet. So my final comment, and along with what was said yesterday and today by Stephen, and I now more and more in believe that we need to change fundamentally and profoundly the ways we carry out science and scientific research, perhaps really, at least for those global challenges that were named here many times, transforming the process of creating knowledge to become more inclusive along the ideas already spoken out of co-design and co-production of knowledge. In my role, in my country, in my government, I'm trying very hard to do it, to engage policymakers in all levels of code design, and even to some extent in co-production of knowledge. I think we have to have this completely new vision which will change the way scientists work, but I see that perhaps as one attempt to be pursued in the next decade or two. Thank you very much.